trying to say with this story? Is he trying to demonstrate that if you don't have power in this magical way, that you're going to be oppressed? Or is he saying, even though I don't have magical power, I will not let that stop me from attaining what I want? Has anyone ever seen the movie Gattaca?
Yeah.
So, you know, in that movie, that character, I won't spoil it all because it's a fabulous movie, but he does not have the advantages that his brother does. And there's this great scene when his brother asks, how do you swim so fast and save enough energy to swim back? And he says, I never saved enough energy to swim back. And that's, you know, a perfect encapsulation of the human spirit, of being indomitable. Is that what the author's trying to convey? So that's really what I mean when I say it depends. It just depends on what the story is trying to tell. And so these mechanics of, you know, how do you put your limits on the magic so that they don't take over the world? What if you want them to take over the world? What if that's the story you want to tell? So that's why I'm saying it depends. Now, in terms of my particular story, the epic fantasy series, it's the people that might take over the world are constrained by the fact that there's still a goddess out there that's going to kill anything that steps outside of the city that's protected. So
is this the schizophrenic?
This is the schizophrenic. At least she thinks she is. In the young adult series, you know, you just set these artificial limits, like what you're saying is, how do you limit them? Well, you have to come up with that on your own if you're the author. For me, it was just, there are only places where magic can be done because, and then I explain why that because is present.
Okay, you in the last shirt back there. I know that I saw you before, but...
That's okay. So, my question is easy. I've got a friend that liked fantasy years ago, fantasy from the 80s. He still enjoys it, but he won't read anything new. If you were to suggest one of your books that I should suggest to that person, which one?
What books did you like from the 80s?
High fantasy. I like urban fantasy.
So high fantasy being like Terry Brooks or David Eddings or what?
Or Misty Lackey, Mercedes Lackey, sorry.
No, Terry Brooks.
So I think the one book that he would like of mine would probably be the one that I have sitting up here called A Warrior's Path. It's the first book of the Casts and the Outcasts. And that was a great point about the heretic, because there's a reason why the outcasts are included, because there is such a thing as an outcast in India. But I think if I was to say which of my books is most like that, like the ones from the 80s, it would be A Warrior's Path.
And as far as mine's concerned, right now you can only get the short story that I was mentioning, A Goddess in Red. I'm working on a petty necromancy. That's the title of it. It's with my agent and with some publishers, hopefully someday, soon. But the cool thing about that particular anthology that I am in is it's called Noir Fatale, and it has a lot of femme fatale stuff in it. But
awesome.
It's yeah. Thank you, Siska.
I might be biased.
I only have one story in it, and there are stories by Lyra Correa, Casey Azell. I'm sure Siska can belt out a few other names. I'm drawing a blank right now, but they're all across the spectrum of science fiction. So there's hardcore, hard science fiction, Set on the Moon. There's my fantasy. It's dark, urban, old, not urban, modern. And then there's urban fantasy. So there's also Laurel K. Hamilton in that story. So there's a lot of flavors to get in that particular thing. I always suggest anthologies for people that are going to come back and pick up, because you'll be able to, you know, first off, I call them grabber books, so you can read something while you're doing your business, or when you're going to bed, and you finish it, so you can finish that one thing.
I hope when you're going to bed it's not the same as when you're in the bathroom.
No, not yet.
But eventually does happen.
Yes, exactly.
On that note, I think I'm going to move to the green bearded section over here.
So I play a lot of fantasy role-playing games and that sort of thing, working with different, very hard structured management systems. So I'm wondering, how do you take, structured management systems such as your caste system, where there's a group of people who all have like a similar
So each of the casts has their own unique magical abilities. So for instance, casts come up, they can make themselves think faster and move faster and punch harder. But they don't have some of the other abilities that the other casts do. In terms of how do they manifest those abilities and what differentiates one another, again, it's training, it's desire, it's want, it's what you put into it. And it's also inborn ability, because, you know, let's face it, there is inborn ability. I would have loved to have been a baseball player. I simply lack the hand-eye coordination to bring that bat around fast enough. I'll never be a baseball player. So those kind of things are also important. You have to, but again, if you have all the talent in the world, but you don't put the work in, it will not achieve you anything. So those are the things that I wanted to convey, is that you have to earn what you achieve. It's not given to you.
Just to kind of follow on to that, is there anybody who's faking it? Like they're acting like they're the big cheese and they're really not all that much of the big cheese?
There's one, and you'll have to read about him.
Because again, like the heretic, the fool, and or the imposter is a good way to illustrate what's going on in your magic or your world, because their behavior looks appropriate but is not appropriate, and you're able to define why that is for the reader without an info dump. So it's pretty exciting to be able to do that. I think there was another. Whoop.
Yes. Wow, there are a lot.
We had up here in front here.
Yes, but she's asked one already. But I think she hasn't. There's only so much time.
The panel promised me messy magic, so any like gross, weird magic thing you have?
I believe one of these people has written
Yes.
about shamanistic stuff at least once.
Well, I don't know if it's gross or not, but like one of the things that was fascinating to me is the idea of channeling something, channeling power from one place to another. So, anybody here familiar with the Roman tortoise, basically putting the shields up and everything and going forward? Right? So, the necromancer falls in with a bunch of oath-sworn folks to this lady who's a really cool, noble woman. I really enjoyed writing her. And they're going to take out a pathless enclave, which is overrun with basically mutants. And they're in a tortoise because they got to get close enough so that the necromancer can convey the bonfire flames into the walls, the wooden palisade of the little fort that they've made. And she's standing there and she's like, okay, now is the time. And every time she says something, they see the flames, everything flickers inside the thing because she is channeling through her body the flames of this bonfire, this enormous bonfire that's on the other side. And in doing so, she kind of reveals that she's a little bit more than she says she is. She's like the most powerful that anybody's ever seen in the last couple hundred years, because things have been going badly for the select. So the gross thing about that is like, well, okay, so when she does that with water, what's going on? When she does that with earth, what's going on? But to have the visible references of that kind of thing. There is also the possession, because it's a necromancy thing. There's also some possession going on. Some people committing suicide and then being raised from the dead. There's plenty of grossness as far as that's concerned, but I can't think of anything that's just exactly outre in that regard, except for the fact that this person consumes souls in order to live.
So just to clarify, you by messy, you mean like physically messy? Like splattering blood and stuff?
Yeah.
Okay, so in my young adult series, I have a type of being called a necros, and they're basically zombie terminators. You cannot argue with them, and they will keep coming. But when I'm in the point of view of one of those creatures, their entire focus is on how they can harvest organs to replace what's putrefying on them. And so you might have been the one that gave me the 1-star review, because somebody wrote, I could only read one page and then I had to give it up because this was so gross. But there you have it. It was in the first chapter of William Wilde and the Necros, and it was about this creature, and all it was focusing on was replacing its dying organs. So whenever that character shows up, that's what it wants.
And actually, it's been so long since I started working on the first part of this thing. She is a necromancer. She was sucked up from the bottom of the lake. She has no eyelids. She forgets to grab eyelids when she kills the people that bring her up. So she's walking around for a day and a half with not unable to blink. So she's a little angry with herself because I'm an experienced necromancer. Why did I screw that up? And then she kills a bunch of bandits and she starts looking at, oh, that guy's got a sty. I'm taking that eye. So that kind of gross stuff going on. So it's almost exactly the same. It's kind of interesting that came up.
That guy in the beige. While I contemplate all this stuff and try and remember, I need to keep my stomach down.
Congratulations. So in Western medieval fantasy, there's a lot of trappings that come up a lot, like wands and staves and abracadabra-like sort of incantations. Are there any trappings of magic in, different cultures that you maybe research that you don't see a lot, maybe you'd like to see more, maybe that wouldn't be your words?
The sand mandalas, I would love to see something done with that because that is so cool. I can't remember which. What was it's the political thing? The president was having a mandala made.
For the religious ritual?
They had monks in the White House doing the mandala, and it was like at the beginning of every episode.
Right.
The name of the show.
West Wing.
It wasn't West Wing, actually. It was
Madam Secretary.
House of Cards. House of Cards. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know if I really researched magic to look for other type of magic that isn't Western in orientation. I was more interested in culture that was not Western medieval in orientation. And nothing's wrong with that, with Western medieval culture. I happen to love the rationalism that came from it. But it's just that I didn't want to write that. So I focused more on the society and how I wanted to convey some of the Indian aspects into the book.
And there's also, the Serpent and the Rainbow is a great jumping off point for the mixture of African and Catholicism, that kind of stuff. If anybody hasn't seen the film, it's pretty cool. The book is amazing.
I also think that one of the things that you have to be really careful about is that some of these magical systems are religions to lots of societies. So you don't want to just, like one of the things that pissed me off to no end, and it still does, is there was an advanced D&D manual, Gods and Goddesses, and Vishnu had hit points.
I have that. It's at home.
And that still irritates me 30 years later, that they put Vishnu in amongst all these Greek gods and goddesses as though he's just, just another god. And it doesn't matter that a billion people actually worship him. So I think you have to be careful about what you're doing. Like even if you try to include, you want to honor Native American culture, you have to be careful that you're not screwing it up and putting in some true religious meaning and saying this is fiction.
You've had your hand up before, and I said we're going to reach you. Yes, I came back to you. I wanted to make sure other people got their moment.
So you kind of already touched on this. I was going to ask how your heritage affects your writing. I already mentioned the casteism in the book, but what other ways?
So when I was growing up, there weren't a lot of people that looked like me or sounded like me. Well, I guess not sounded like me, but smelled like me, because I smelled like Indian spices. And so
And we want to be clear, here,
yes.
perhaps. Yeah,
Yes,
there were
here.
a lot of them,
Yeah.
just not here.
Right. But the books I read and loved, a lot of them were 80s fiction. I mean, you grow up with the things you love, and you always remember them and love them. And for me, my loves were the things from the 80s, everything 80s, which is why I set my young adult series in 1987. And he was a senior in high school when I was a senior in high school. And, but at the same time, you know, you grow to appreciate your own culture. And it took me a long time to really appreciate my own culture, because that's just the way it is when you're an immigrant, at least for me. And then I wanted to really incorporate some of those elements that were important and that I wasn't seeing in other books, and so that it doesn't always have to be about white people doing the daring do. It can be about other types of people, but they're just people. At the bottom, it's just, at the start, it's people. It's not just some brown, you know, hero. It is a person first, man or woman, or otherwise.
Yeah, that's huge. There are ways to do things respectfully. You have to very much put your adult clothes on before you go ahead and try and do those things, because regardless of your intention, you may make mistakes. You have to own those mistakes and move forward. But you also have, everyone has to realize, the public has to realize that this is art. You know, some art is not going to be to your taste. Some art is going to be found to be offensive to some people. And if it is a consistent stream of, obviously you're just trying to offend or oppress somebody, then obviously that's wrong. But on occasion, we've gotten away from giving people a little bit of slack. Hey, calling them, saying, hey, maybe that wasn't the best idea. But again, this is me, straight white male, talking from the front of the room with all the privilege of that position in society. But one of the things that was always important to me, like when I was in the souk in Egypt and there were riots and they were coming for people that looked like me, I was, oh wow, this is an eye-opener. Because you know, no matter where you go, there you are. With you and your baggage are there. And we need to all recognize that everybody's got their baggage that's falling along behind you. And that the baggage may not be something that you recognize as being weighty, but boy is it to that person. So you want to always try and keep aware of the fact that you may be making mistakes, and be aware that you can do better, strive to do better, challenge yourself to do better.
We have time enough for 2 last questions, and I'm actually going to let each of you choose one person. Okay.
You may have answered this earlier, but where did you grow up, and you said you were the top of 1 year. Well, further back in your earlier years, where did you grow up, and where you grew up, have any effect on that you rock?
So, born in East Peoria, Illinois, then lived in Canada and Toronto, then moved to Spain, lived there for a year, came back, lived in Peoria, Illinois again for another 10 years, and then moved over to Geneva, Switzerland, and finished up my high school there, went to college, met my wife, came back to Reno, which is not my favorite place, and then California, where I reside now.
I was born in India, and I came over when I was 3 years old, and I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio.
So where in India?
Andhra Pradesh, a little town, little village called Chalapalli is where I was born, which is near Vijayawada, which is up north, up towards the ocean. But I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and the first book in my young adult series, set in 1987, is set in Cincinnati, Ohio. The high school they go to is a Jesuit high school. Guess where I went? I went to Cincinnati St. Xavier, which is a Jesuit high school. Mine was all boys. This one's co-ed, so that's the one difference. But I've lived in the Caribbean. I've lived in London, and some of the stories or worlds that I came up with. Like this idyllic island in the South Pacific came to me when I was living in Indianapolis, and it was this gray, ugly, gloomy weather. If you know a Midwestern winter, you know what I'm talking about. It's just months of depression.
And I was wondering if either you were Midwestern, and you both have really backgrounds.
Yeah, I live in North Carolina now, and so my main character, he was half Indian from the hills of North Carolina who grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and goes to a Jesuit high school and looks like my boys.
So one last question, and I want it to be.
Actually, we have somebody who's behind the pillar back here. on
We
the
have
side.
someone behind the pillar who
Go
is.
ahead, Matt.
It seems to me that maybe part of magic has something to do with how you're using magic as a symbol in your story. Could you speak to that?
Absolutely. It's also whether or not it's a mechanism for change, a mechanism for static, like we're going to keep everything like it is. There's lots of different ways to use it as a symbol and as an adjunct to your culture, which the culture generally is invisible to those who are in it. That's part of the problem that we're having right now is people that have historically not had the voice that straight white males do. They're now going, hey man, and that's really uncomfortable to certain strata of the culture, namely the ones who had the advantage all along. And it's really hard for people to be slapped in the face with their privilege and then go, blah, 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 but that's not my fault. And so magic can be a good way of conveying that kind of same thing, that same like, wow, this is the way it's supposed to be, and yet, no, that's not the way it's supposed to be. The heretic is a good way to use that kind of angle on the society.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. The magic can definitely be used to make a statement if that's what you want to do. And it doesn't even have to just be one statement. It can be a multiplicity of statements. That the notion that you have to be pure in order to survive, or pure in order to be considered a good person, and you just have only your caste's magic. What if there's something else called an outcast? And so that is something that I was trying to convey with the caste and the outcast. And then the control of magic, to his question earlier, in my second young adult series, it takes place, the main character is involuntarily voluntold to go to an island that, in my estimation, I was trying to make it something like a North Korean or a Soviet-era gulag, except not quite that bad. Otherwise, I don't think anyone would ever want to read it, and they'd think it wasn't young adult, it's just gross. So, again, I was trying to use magic as this overpowering, controlling aspect where one person is in charge and he's so much more powerful, everyone bends to his will. And how do you escape that? Or how do you rebel against that? Or do you just bow down and bend your knee? And that's what the second story is about.
Okay, so it looks like we might be going a little over. I'm going to apologize to all of you about that, but I like this part of the thing. Tell me, what all do you have coming out soon or are working on? What should I spend my money on?
I finished The Cast and the Outcast about a year ago, so that's a 3-book trilogy. And then my young adult epic fantasy series finished, it's a 5-book series. The last book came out on August 6th. It's called The Chronicles of William Wilde. And both series are complete. They're available on Amazon as ebooks, hardback, paperback, and then on Audible. It was narrated by Nick Bedell, all 8 books. So, thank you. Nick's wonderful, by the way. Just an absolute gem of a person. He's so fun to work with. Anyway, he really is. So all 8 books are available on Audible, and so if you want to hear my books done by a master, that's where you can also find them.
So I have Mission to the Moove is currently out in paperback as of last year, and I'm finishing up The Peacock Throne, which is when Aurangzeb gets his just desserts at the hands of Jahanara and Dara a little bit. So there's that, and then I'm in 4 anthologies this year for short stories. Lost Signals with Chuck Gannon for science fiction, and set in his Kane Riordan universe, which is hard science fiction. And that draws heavily on the law enforcement career. And the story in that is called Crater 88, and and I have the A Goddess in Red, which is the fantasy story that I've been talking about ad nauseum this evening. And hopefully that story, that novel will get picked up and I will be able to continue doing it. That is my passion project. That is, oh man, it's, because I have so much invested in that I want to get done. But I'm finishing up the Peacock Throne, and it requires a lot of research because I really hate being wrong. And I also, part of that being, we were talking about that being earlier, was respectful, because here I am writing about an alternate history in which sixth guru, Harivanth Singh, is just militarized the Sikhs. Aurangzeb and Dara, there's a huge division as to what they were like and what they were doing and why.
That depends on your religion.
That's true. And then it also depends on your subdivision of your religion as well. And so what is it, 5 major religions stem from this region within the 500 years either way of the time in which I'm writing. So, wow. No, yeah. It was pretty challenging. And writing the sequel to it, I'm having a challenges doing it. And then I am, lost signals. Voices of the Fall zombie anthology, which is, John Ringo calls it the zombie anthology that, where the competent actually do things, and, rather than the horror show that is like, oh, we're going to betray everybody and everybody's going to get one over on the other and then we're going to all die. So, and in that story, it's alpha gamers, so if you're a gamer and you have thought amongst your gamer friends that, we're going to survive, this is my actual gaming group. And 2 of my friends they had a checkered past. And talking to them, and those 2 dudes are going to survive. And so we worked on that, and they are my friends. One is by his own name, and his son is in the story as well. And the other one is by a different name because he just wanted to be a little distant. And then I have another story that's going to be coming out, and I'm not sure if it's announced yet, so I probably can't talk about it, but with one of the big writers from the Noir Fatale anthology. And so yeah, that's where I'm at right now. And I'm constantly looking for work and trying to get things done.
Well, thank you 2 for coming, and thank you, the audience, for being here. Be sure to rate us in the app. And now I need a drink.
Thanks to the moderator. Thank you.